Welcome, welcome.
All right, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, we'd love to just kind of have us tell us just kind of how you got started in life, and I know why I became passionate about health. I worked as a nurse's aide in a long-term care facility, and that just scared me half to death. Working with people that had Alzheimer's and were completely out of their mind and bedridden, and I kind of became a health nut back then. Tell us about yourself, Dr. Dixon. Kind of what sparked your change there in your life?
Yeah, well, Rusty, I appreciate the courtesy, but please call me Brian. Really, we're all friends here, right?
Yeah.
No, I think I've had maybe 2 resurrections when it comes to nutrition, but maybe I'll kind of just tell you like where I'm from originally and kind of how I even ended up in nutrition. But I grew up in a really, really small town in Oregon, a place called Hood River, a very beautiful place. Grew up on a whole bunch of land, and we had just one neighbor beside us. It was this just amazing Japanese couple. And I think when I was probably 12 or 13 years old, they caught me peering over the fence, so they invited me over. And maybe as, sometimes stereotypes are true, but in their very Japanese way, they were out there, I swear, every day from sun up to sundown, working in their garden, literally out there working with tweezers and little tiny scissors, not like us with the big hedge pruners or anything. So just their attention to detail. And so they really just taught me how to garden, kind of took me under their wing, convinced my mom to till up a little patch of dirt, and then grew a garden in their backyard. And I've been gardening ever since. So 12 or 13, I'm 43 now. So literally 30 years of experimentation. And so my first love of gardening obviously came from them, but that's also where I got my first love of nutrition. So I was a competitive athlete as well growing up. Probably my best sport was swimming, but also pretty all right with soccer. Where I grew up in the world is one of the windsurfing capitals of the world, maybe second to Hawaii. So windsurfing was a huge part of my life. I did triathlon in college, but I had a really amazing coach that was ahead of his time, and I'd kind of peaked in some of my swimming performances. And he just said, Brian, I watch you eat donuts every morning for breakfast. And, a lot of elite athletes are just worried about putting the calories back in. I mean, swimming, what would we be doing? At least 3.5 hours every day in the pool. And then every other day we had weights thrown in there as well. So I was just worried about calories, wasn't really thinking about, nutrition. And he just said, look, if you get your nutrition right, it's going to take your sports to the next level. And he was absolutely right. So between doing all this experimentation in the garden, getting my own nutrition right, and seeing the results themselves, I couldn't be a more firm believer in nutrition. And the reason why gardening was so enlightening for me was the thing that I learned, and the thing that this wonderful elderly Japanese couple instilled in me is, if you want to get your garden right, you've got to get the soil right. And so, focus 90% of your time on just making sure you're doing everything to keep feeding the soil. If you feed the soil, it's going to feed your plants. And that's just, every year, or if I've moved and have to start from scratch, right, the first thing you do is just spend all of my time working on the soil. So, seeing that in my own hands was amazing. Like I said, through childhood sports, got really interested. And then I went ultimately to university to get a degree in agriculture. So I was going to go back and work in the family business around tree fruit was a major agricultural crop where I grew up. So I have my undergraduate in entomology, which it actually comes around full circle in just a minute. But anybody know what entomology is? Not a lot of people know, and it's not often I get to use that degree. But if you don't know, entomology is the study of insects, but it was really centered on some of the early biological control and this organic farming practices that were starting to hit the mainstream at that time. And that was really the gist of the family business. Was my dad was a consultant, so he'd go into these different crops and he'd just say, you pay me by acre, but I promise, just because of the monitoring and the things we're going to do to encourage just a healthy ecosystem, I'm going to save you $1 zillion on all the sprays that you're going to have to put on your crop. And, he was just asking to share a small percentage of that savings. Well, long story longer, I was just about a term or two away from graduating, and my dad gives me a call and he says, Brian, I don't think there's any work for us here anymore. There was some governmental policies that were put into place, mostly around free trade. And if you just think about how labor intensive those crops are, I mean, a hand has to touch every apple or every pear or every cherry. They're out there pruning the trees by hand all winter long. And so it just got to the point where kind of the U.S. apple pear industry couldn't keep up with things in South America, and then some of the stuff that was even happening overseas. So my dad had to pivot, and he got into different work, and then I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do, so I hit out in graduate school, started pursuing a master's, and made a complete shift from agriculture into biomedical research. So I initially started studying circadian rhythms. So it's those processes, if you're not familiar, that kind of control our daily life. So it's why we sleep at night, why we're awake during the day, or why nocturnal animals are awake during the night and sleeping during the day. And it really controls every aspect of our physiology.
How'd you pick that, Brian, from going from entomology? How'd you pick, what kind of sparked that pick right there?
Yeah, no, good question. So in my undergrad, I was volunteering in a laboratory, and the professor was doing biomedical research, but the experimental model was insects. So you can do a lot of different genetic work on some of these lower organisms like fruit flies or even something called a nematode worm. And those are really some of the key experimental models. So she was kind of this outcast in the department. Everyone else is counting hairs on flies, trying to figure out what fly is zipping around your head. But she was really doing biomedical research. So I volunteered in her lab and kind of fell in love with it early on. And then when I just kind of saw the writing on the wall for ag, at least for me, I just thought, what a great opportunity. So came back to her laboratory to work on my master's. So, and then from that, like I said, I fell in love with it. And then I rolled that into PhD, and I changed my major to molecular and cellular biology. And it's a great program, and every term you have to rotate through a different laboratory. So see what topics you're most interested in. So rotated through a genetics laboratory, rotated through a cancer research laboratory.
What was kind of driving that shift, Brian, to go that direction then? Was there something else going on that maybe kind of brought that into focus, or?
I fell in love with that biomedical research. And at the time too, somewhere in that transition, there was a research institute that moved to Oregon State, and it was named after its namesake is Linus Pauling. So if you're familiar with who Linus Pauling is, I know not a lot of people are, but if you're a scientist, you definitely know. And
think of vitamin C. That's what I think of when I hear his name.
That's exactly right, and that's really his claim to fame, especially later in life. In fact, I consider Dr. Pauling to be the father of modern nutrition. Absolutely. So that's another long story, but he initially had started a research institute down in California, where he was a professor at Caltech. And he started this research institute around nutrition because Caltech wouldn't let him study nutrition. In fact, a lot of his colleagues thought he was a complete quack for wanting to study nutrition. So he said, that's fine. I'll go kind of do this on the side. So they were completely private, would raise private monies to research what nutrition was doing to either cause disease and even how they could use nutrition to prevent diseases. And so he got really interested in vitamin C and especially a number of psychoses. So his first book was how vitamin C could affect all of these different brain disorders. And so anyway, his other alma mater, it's another long story, but he ended up moving the institute to Oregon State, which was his other alma mater. He did his undergraduate there. So when the Linus Pauling Institute moved there, they brought in all these high caliber researchers, and they were also looking for graduate students. And then just reading the different topics that all those different investigators were studying, it was just so interesting to me. So things like aging, cancer, Lou Gehrig's disease or ALS, all sorts of different topics. So just was so interested in those. And so I really think I was just trying to weasel my way into the Institute. And so those, with the exception of the genetics laboratory, all of those other labs were in the Linus Pauling Institute. And had some great success both in genetics and cancer, but I really just fell in love with just studying the aging process. So during my graduate studies, my boss was a biochemist. I was a molecular and cellular biologist, but really we were just trying to understand what's changing on that cellular level as we got older. And once we identified the problems or the changes, we would look for nutritional means to either slow down or reverse those changes altogether. So coming back into another resurrection for nutrition, I mean, when you can see the power of nutrition just in your hands with your own experimental models, and how just some simple, inexpensive nutritional interventions can completely change how our biochemistry is working. It just, for me, it was just mind-blowing and fascinating. So I went on there, had some success in those studies, and I stayed on to postdoc in the Linus Pauling Institute to kind of follow up on the different experimental models and then translate those into actual human studies.
So, yeah, you've been studying this, but what the public awareness of nutrition and say genetics, what's going on there as far as you're concerned?
It really is the forefront and where nutrition is going. I love to ask the question, and this is always a challenge with webinars, but I love to ask the question, when anybody know when the last essential vitamin was discovered? I mean, how long ago would you guys guess? It's 75 years.
Whoa.
So we've literally known for the last 75 years all of the things, those essential nutrients that our bodies need, and they're important, and there's definitely a role for them. And looking at the scientific literature, I mean, we're all nutrient deficient to some degree, and there's no perfect diet. We're creatures of habit. We tend to eat the same foods over and over and over again, so that can also lead to kind of slight nutritional deficiencies over time. So those things are important, but while there's been advances in maybe dosages or the forms, when's the best time to take some of these things, it really has stayed pretty stagnant to some degree. So where is nutrition going? It's going down this nutrigenomic route where, and it's kind of sloppy words, and I hesitate to throw them out there when I'm talking about nutrition, but it's really kind of utilizing the pharmaceutical model, if you will, to thinking about nutrition. So what do I mean by that? So if you think about what a pharmaceutical company is doing, they want to drive some physiological endpoint. So it could be blood pressure or decreasing our inflammation, name it, right? Diabetic drugs. So they're trying to control an output, but then they're trying to figure out what they can put into the system to drive that output. So they'll go into the cell and they'll look for these various molecular targets. And they'll go in, and ironically, what they tend to do most often is what they call biomining. So they'll get to the tippy tops of mountains or into the rainforests or to the bottoms of the oceans, pull out these exotic plants and pull out all these different extracts and run them through these very set screening protocols that they've set up. And so when they start to find these extracts that are eliciting a similar response, they'll try to go in and figure out what's the exact molecule that's responsible for that. But then where it deviates is these pharmaceutical companies then have to put their chemists on the job, design a synthetic molecule that doesn't exist in nature so that they can patent it and then spend those millions and millions of dollars for clinical research. They get the okay from, in the US, from our FDA, or Food and Drug Administration, and then they get to go ahead to sell a pharmaceutical drug. Well, what's been known in about the last 10 to 20 years at most is that nutrients can have these exact same effects. And so really where this field is going is, let's look at that same endpoint that we want to happen, but let's look back to nature and look at the compounds that nature has at its disposal to elicit that same response. Because we've grown up for how many thousands of years with plants, right? And who are the best chemists in the world? It's not someone who spent, like me, too much time in school. It's plants, right? If you think about planting a tomato plant next to a corn plant or whatever plant it might be in your yard, they're all putting their roots in the same soil, but through all their chemical processes, they can make all these different compounds. And so that's really where nutrition's going in the future. And that's exactly LifeVantage's sole purpose, is to look for these compounds that can elicit these cellular responses. And then me being a molecular biologist and into that minutia, I want to know everything that's happening in between and where those molecular targets are actually happening.
Now, NRF2 is nothing new to you. Tell us kind of what, how you were excited about it even before LifeVantage. And
a major part of my PhD dissertation was on NRF2 and how, one, that signaling decreases with age. And what was so interesting, when we first started doing our experiments in the lab, we were under the premise of what's known as the free radical theory of aging. Probably the most popular theory of aging that's out there. And so we were working in a pretty big laboratory, and all the different scientists in the lab were working on a different aspect of aging and somehow related to that free radical or oxidative stress theory of aging. But as the studies progressed, it seemed to fall apart just a little bit. And it wasn't so much free radicals, as bad as they are, and it's still definitely a major theory of aging. But what we found was that it was a loss of these different cell signaling pathways. And we call them, academically, we call them stress response pathways. So if you think about, our bodies are really good at sensing its environment. So whether it's its external environment or even its internal environment, our bodies are set up to sense all that stuff. So it's really adapting to a stress. So are you too hot? Are you too cold? Are you holding your breath? Are you exercising vigorously? Like, think of all those physiological changes that are happening. And those are all in response to type of stress. So oxidative stress, toxicological stress, on down the road. Okay. And so what we found, and what became the underlying theory that we started working under, was what we call a loss of stress response. So the first question was, are these responsive pathways, are they still working? Or another way to say it, is the machinery still in place, but the signal's just not getting through as efficiently? So we did a whole bunch of experiments, and what we were able to conclude in almost every single case is that it's the signal is getting lost through these different pathways. And then what we found is, if you could go in with the right nutrients and tickle the right places in the cell, these different molecular targets, you could reawaken these signaling pathways and elicit these beneficial responses. And so a major one that we saw declining with age was NRF2. And of course, that was a natural fit as well into that free radical or oxidative stress theory of aging, as well as a lot of different aspects of things that we saw changing. So we showed very clearly that you could put in just a couple of compounds into the system, kind of shock the system, if you will, and you could then literally make, in terms of NRF2 signaling, you could make these old experimental models young again. So very fascinating, and I've spent a ton of time researching NRF2 as well as some other aspects of aging as well.
That's one of the things that really excited me, about your bio and where you're coming from, is to working with LifeVantage. What, talk about then kind of the process of looking at LifeVantage and kind of maybe why you wanted to go that direction.
Yeah. So after I finished my graduate work, I thought I was going down this academic path, and I was working on some of these studies. I ended up getting recruited by another nutrition company who also happened to be in direct selling. So I worked for them for almost 11 years. But I always had my eye on LifeVantage because I'd hear this NRF2 story, right? The NRF2 Synergizer. And I'm thinking, what company can take this complicated story, put it in a bottle, and then also successfully tell the story? So I'd always been intrigued, and I'd always had my eye on LifeVantage. And there's a couple ways to put it: competitive analysis or corporate spying, I guess, would be the nefarious way to put it. But I'd look to them and how are they getting these complicated messages across? And so, like I said, I had my eye on LifeVantage for a while, and it was just through the most random set of circumstances that I ended up meeting a number of individuals that worked at LifeVantage. Ended up having dinner one evening with the chief marketing officer, and then, a couple months later, he'd given me a call and just said, "Hey, we're looking for a scientist. Any chance you'd give us a closer look?" And I jumped at the opportunity, did my homework. When I went in and met with everybody in the corporate office there, I fell in love with it and where they're going and just what they want to do in the nutritional space. They're just a company that I call in the sweet spot, being 10 years of age. So they're established. It's not one of these fly-by-night companies that we see so often come and go in the industry, but they're still young and hungry and want to disrupt in the space. And, to have that opportunity to use my science for good, I guess you'd say, it was just really intriguing. That just fed so well into my background and my past. When I read the job description for the position, I just thought, gosh, did Ryan personally write this for me? I mean, just kind of checking the boxes as I'm reading it. So it just
Ryan is definitely into his own hacking and his nutrition and his health and his sleep and lighting. And I mean, all the stuff he's into is kind of cool.
Yeah,
let's go back just for a second, Brian, and kind of go back over what your passion for your health and your dad, kind of how that kind of figured into, because the thing that excites me about you, like we said at the beginning, was your personal passion for your own health and the way you live your life is and I have chosen to do the same in my life. And so it's inspiring. To me, it's like the Cinderella story. We're looking for the person to fit the shoe, and the shoe fits you. And that's just how I see it. It's like you're looking for this guy, and all of a sudden Brian's the guy. The shoe fits, and you're the guy that really can really take us the distance. So tell us a little bit about how your dad kind of figured into that story.
Yeah, I love your story there too, Rusty. It's just, and it's not my word, so I can't take credit. But someone just put it. I refuse to participate in the aging process, right? And we don't have to accept all of this as kind of our destiny, if you will. And I'm looking at the faces on the call here. I know there's a lot of young people on the call as well, but I mean, aging starts when we're really, really young, right? I mean, in our 20s, we can even start to see some of the physiological manifestations, right? With hearing, with eyesight, our heart rate constantly is slowing down as we get older. Our lungs can't hold as much air. I mean, it's why elite and professional athletes tend to always be in their 20s. You're lucky to have a professional career in your 30s, and then a 40-year-old playing professional athletes is really an anomaly, right? And it's just because of that. Aging is really starting young, and you're at your prime about 18, and it's downhill from there. It just doesn't really seem to manifest super overtly until we get much older. But it's really never too young to start thinking about your aging. But then, and talking about my dad, it was another kind of resurrection for nutrition. We were having Thanksgiving dinner about 4 years ago, and it was at my brother's house. So we all go down and meet up with my brother at his place in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it's just been a wonderful tradition for many, many years. So it's my brother and I get together, cook for everybody. People kind of come and go to the kitchen, and then I try to have a little interaction with my dad, and it was just off. And my dad is really tech savvy, and I was watching him trying to unlock his iPhone, and he couldn't hit the buttons. And so then I really started to engage him in conversation, and it was just a bunch of gibberish nonsense, right? And so just kept talking to him, and I don't know why it popped in my head right away, but it just stroke was the first thing that came to my mind. So I went to my brother and I just said, hey, Kevin, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I think Dad's having a stroke right now. So I said, try to engage him in a conversation and tell me what you think. And so he did that, and he said, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So we immediately called the ambulance. You know, we didn't have a chance to even eat our Thanksgiving dinner. We spent that first night in ICU, and then he kind of snapped out of it a little bit. And my dad's a smart man. I think he knew he was in trouble, but he managed to talk his way out of the ER saying, nothing's wrong, nothing's wrong. And we're just like, you're crazy. We witnessed it.
Yeah.
So they sent him home that next day. And then later that night, the exact same thing happened. And I was shooting videos just because I was going to show the doctors and just be like, look, this is what we experienced. He's definitely having some serious strokes. So I called the ambulance again. He spent the night again in ICU, but the doctors called us up and just said, hey, Brian, we don't think your dad's going to make it through the night. I mean, he was plugged into every different machine that you could imagine. And I'm just so thankful for the ICU nurse, and I'm embarrassed I don't even know her name. But if it wasn't for her, there's no way that my dad would have made it through the night. Somehow she got him through. And forgive me, but I've never heard a doctor curse in a professional setting. But we were in with my dad, and when the doctor came in to do his rounds that next morning, the words out of his mouth were, holy shit, I can't believe you're alive. I mean, so to hear a doctor say that, I mean, you realize how close he was to passing away.
Right.
And so through, gosh, I don't know how long he spent, another week, probably 10 days in the ICU, and then another week just recovering. And then eventually they released him to ultimately go home. He bounced back, but he hasn't been the same ever since. And, he lives in Salt Lake City now, mostly so we can keep a closer eye on he and my mom. But, shows up at my house. I never know who's showing up. I don't know if it's the same dad who raised me and my brother so well, or if it's just a 3-year-old temperamental, child that's showing up. And he's really just a shell of a man that he used to be.
Wow,
and he's, when I look back at everything, he's had health challenges his whole life. But he's gotten through everything. I mean, everything from a brain tumor to skin cancer to, gallbladder removed. He's a kidney transplant recipient. My brother donated a kidney to him back in 2002. And, people really approach this adversity in one of two ways. It either becomes very motivating to somebody, or people just kind of fold up and go into a ball. And especially with that kidney transplant, he really kind of balled up and went into a ball, and just kind of took that victim mentality, like, why me, instead of looking at it as the miracle that it was. So it was also the day going in for his kidney transplant that he was diagnosed as being type 2 diabetic. So how this missed I think he was diagnosed with chronic kidney failure, and I think it took about 17 years for it to manifest. So how a kidney doctor would miss that somebody had diabetes is
beyond
mystery to me. But, they almost called off the surgery, but they went ahead with it anyway. So ever since that day as well, he's been type 2 diabetic, and still not another wake-up call, just, why me? And it's so interesting when you get people of my parents' age in a room, how it turns into a bragging session almost about what meds they're taking. And it's just, for me, it's just so mind-blowing. And so as long as I can remember, my dad is overweight, generously 50 pounds, if not more. And pounds on probably a 5'5" frame is significantly overweight. And it's just really what I call a self-inflicted wound. I mean, if knowing what I know, I would put my money down in Vegas that if he would have got his diet and exercise right, I think he really could have turned things around and turned his health trajectory around as well. So
Yeah.
it's
You're expressing like what we as distributors, and you probably use it. Does your family take Protandim?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I just wonder. Can't even get my aunt to take it. But
We just got a brand new dog yesterday, so the dog's already taken Pet Tandem as well.
Let's talk a little bit about the Super 7 or whatever that new product. I know you've been taking it.
Hey, Rusty, one sec. Before we change topics, did anyone see the headline today in the news outlet about, I think it was a 17-year-old boy who went blind?
No.
Did anyone see this story? So it was a boy that from a very young age was a very picky eater. And so all this kid wanted to eat was a little bit of like, I think it said like sausage and cured meats, but that was pretty rare. And then he only ate French fries, Pringles, and there was one other just junk food that was thrown into the mix. So it turns out the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. He started losing his hearing, started losing his eyesight. Anyway, they traced it back that he was so nutritionally deficient, especially in vitamin B12. And then the carotenoids, obviously, are going to play a huge role in eye health, vitamin A, some of the other healthy compounds from fruits and vegetables. That's why he basically drove himself to be blind because of his nutrition. It's an interesting read if you guys go look for it on your favorite news outlet. But
yeah, so I was just having a look at it right now. So yeah, let's talk about, if you have time, let's talk about, I know we're nearing the end here. Let's talk a little bit about the new product.
Yeah, so as everyone heard, there's a new product coming out at Long Beach here at the beginning of October. So yeah, we're calling it codename Super 7. I don't know if I'm going to be able to call it anything different. I've been calling it Super 7 for so long. But it's a fantastic product. It's, as Darren mentioned, from Stage in Kansas City. It's going to be part of the Protandim line. So that means it's going to fit into that nutrigenomic space. So again, looking at what are those outputs that we want to drive and what are the inputs that we can put into the system to positively affect things that we know we need to keep healthy inside of the cell.
Is it okay for you to tell us how you feel, or we have to kill us if you tell us? Is that one of those
Yeah.
things?
No, I feel amazing on it. And it's what's so great about the product is it's really designed for kind of a 1-2 punch. So the ingredients that are in there, there are some things that we're all going to feel like almost instantaneously, if not in the first day, 2 or 3. And then there's going to be these secondary benefits that maybe you're not necessarily going to feel. I mean, not everybody feels something on Protandim NRF2, for example. Some people do, but some people don't. But we know it's working, right? So then there's going to be the secondary effect that's going to be affecting some of these health pathways that we know we need to support throughout the course of our lives. And so the thing that I feel the most is just mental clarity and focus. And I'm kind of a spaz. My brain's always wandering around as I'm working on a project. Something will pop into my mind about, oh, I need to do that. So I get distracted and then I go work on something else. So the thing I've noticed more than anything is just the ability to focus on a single task, kill it, get it done, and then move on to the next thing. And so that sharpness and alertness has been really my key benefit as well.
I'm sure I can speak for everyone here on this call that we're all looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's going to be a great addition to the line and the first of many to come. So
I know we're kind of winding down here. Is there anything?
No, I'm good. Don't worry about me.
Okay, anything else you want to tell us that's kind of on your heart and mind today?
Like I said early on, I'm so excited to be at this company, and it's a great responsibility. But I'm ready to raise to the challenge of developing your next generation of products. I think Darren Jensen, our CEO, has done an amazing job kind of stabilizing the ship with some of the things that have happened in the past. I just think the world of the management that's there. I'm so grateful for them. I have their full support. It's just such a great team to bounce ideas off of. I love where the office's head is at. I love the work ethic inside of the office as well. The company runs so incredibly lean. but I've never seen a company that cares so much about doing a job and doing a job well and being really proud of their work. And then the other thing too that's on my mind is just thank you to you all. Everyone's just been so gracious and welcoming and supportive to me as well. And everyone told me before I came about how special the distributor base was and the customer base was. But until you experience it for yourself, it's really hard to put into words. And I've just thoroughly enjoyed getting to know everybody. Every interaction I've had has just been so wonderful. So just thank you all for just being so supportive of me and patient, I guess, too, while I'm getting my feet under me as well.
So we're excited. I mean, when I hear you say, Brian, that you're going to work on some products with your passion for your own health, I'm excited just hearing you say that, because I mean, I've always never wanted to age. I mean, just ever since I was younger. So that's exciting just to think of that you're at the helm of the science area, looking at the future, not just riding on what we have right now. That's exciting to me, and I'm sure it's exciting to everyone else.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And it's funny, when I was thinking about making the switch, I was talking to my brother, right, who's also my best friend, and he asked me a question, and forgive me, it's an American baseball analogy, but he asked me the question just straight up. He said, are you an opener or are you a closer? And so what he meant was, are you the guy that likes to come in and build something and kind of set the tone, or do you want to finish what somebody else has started? And I think, you know, at my old company, that's kind of where things had kind of gone. It turned into a job for me, and I was just really babysitting what had already been done before. But the hunger that's in that company, the hunger to innovate and disrupt is so exciting to me. So exciting.
That's awesome to hear. You have time for any questions, just in case anyone has any questions for you?
Yeah, only easy ones though.
If you have any questions, why don't you unmute, not all at once, and shoot your question over.
I have a question. Heidi White from Kona on the Big Island of Hawaii. Can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Heidi.
Hi. So my dad had Parkinson's when he died 5 years ago, and my mom died 2 years ago of dementia. And so I've been taking the stack religiously and supplementing extra of the fish oils. And I'm just wondering, what are your feelings to keep a healthy brain? And I think that's my main thing, is to really keep our health and not, you know, break the traditional, it runs in my family concept.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think you're doing everything exactly right. So one, the new product's going to address some of the brain health issues for sure. But when it comes to brain health, the thing that there's the most research on is those omega-3s. Very few molecules cross what they call the blood-brain barrier. So our brain is incredibly finicky on the things that it will allow into it. And so those nutrients that we know do cross that blood-brain barrier. Carotenoids come to mind. Those omega-3 fatty acids, probably just the best thing anyone can do for brain health. So make sure you're getting enough of those for sure.
When I started taking the omega-3s that we have, I quit forgetting what I went to get in the room. I mean, like in 2 weeks. And it hasn't happened since I started taking it. I'll go into a room. I'm 62. I go into a room and I don't forget what I went to get. And I was doing that all the time before that. So it really does help. It's amazing.
Well, our brain is almost exclusively fat. And of that fat, I believe it's 70% is specifically DHA, one of those omega-3 fatty acids. So we want to give our bodies and brains what they need. You know, another important point, we always talk about exercise, and we think about exercise in our physical fitness, but we don't tend to think about our brains as much. But when we're sitting and focusing and concentrating, it is like you're exercising. You're just exercising your brain. And so people who have had the best brain outcomes in life are the people who continuously use their brains. So college professors tend to live longer. There's a group of nuns that live really, they're long-lived, and they're attributing it to them writing in journals every single day. you can go on down the list, but people who are deliberate in using their brains, just like we talk about exercise in our bodies, is also another absolutely wonderful thing to be doing. So stay sharp and challenge your brain. I mean, if you're right-handed, try using your left hand. If you're left-handed, try using your right hand. And you'll see how weird it feels at first, but you're reconnecting the brain and getting that brain thinking. I mean, picking up a new musical instrument, learning a foreign language, these have all been things that have been shown to be very, very beneficial for brain health as well.
Awesome.